Thank you so much, Simon. And AI is obviously a topic that we'll be coming back to throughout a lot of the sessions today. But I think, again, you've really set the scene brilliantly for our second day of conversations, because lots of those issues that you covered there around how we deploy AI across the public sector to support civil servants in what they do, not just to save costs, to save time, but also improve our processes and improve our services ultimately to the public. But how do we do all of that in an accurate and secure way and make sure that our deployment is responsible? So all of those issues will definitely come up throughout different sessions through the day. Later on in the day, there will be several different parallel sessions running that you can choose from. But for our first session today, we're all staying here in plenary. So just if you don't mind waiting for a couple of moments, we're going to put the seats up here and then invite our first speakers up onto the stage. For those of you who are standing at the back, please do check. There are some seats available if you want to come up while we're getting the panel ready. There are some seats available towards the front if you want to come and sit down. Thanks, Anne. So welcome to the first panel session of the day, everybody. And we're kind of picking up, I think, this morning where we left off yesterday. So yesterday we did touch on the missions in a couple of our sessions, and there was a particular session where we were talking about what does rewiring government actually mean. So today, in our first session, we're going to be looking at rewiring government to deliver. So really focusing on why are we rewiring government and what does that mean in terms of delivery to the public. We have 4 great speakers here. I am going to do quick introductions to our speakers. And then as we did yesterday, I'll ask a couple of questions, but this is very much your session. So for a good half of the session, I'm going to be coming over to you, the audience, to put your questions, your comments to the panel. And as I said yesterday, I really don't want anybody leaving innovation thinking, I wish I'd asked that question, you know, going home and saying, I wish I'd asked that question. Now is your opportunity to ask any questions that you have. So in terms of our fantastic panel, we have Alexis Castillo Soto, who is Deputy Director for Digital Missions and Transformation at the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero here in the UK. We have Nick Matthew, he is one of our partners, sponsors here today from Q5. Then we have Gillian Dorner, who is Deputy Director, Public Governance Directorate at the OECD. But Gillian, I know you spent a lot of time in government yourself as well. And then last but by no means least, we've got Talia Baldwin, who is Director for Strategy and Innovation at the Ministry of Justice, also here in the UK. So, Alexis, I'm going to kick off straight away. The government has obviously set out its 5 missions. The civil service, as we mentioned yesterday, is currently getting itself ready for all of these missions, getting itself into shape. And I think it's safe to say the first one of these really up and running is being chaired by Ed Miliband in your department. So can you tell us a bit about how these boards, the mission boards, are operating, what you think they're going to be doing, and what difference do you think they're going to make?
I think it's going to change really the way that we're doing things. So it's out of the traditional governance that government has usually had, and it's obviously based on outcomes. So that's really important. You know, the energy mission is all about clean energy, particularly solar and wind, and you've probably seen some announcements earlier this week as well. And also about reducing our reliance on fossil fuels and probably strengthening our UK independence. So that sounds grand and great, but I think the biggest change has been the fact that they're doing things that have probably been happening in different sectors, which is around multidiscipline teams, so bringing experts from all different areas together and having that visibility and transparency of where we're all going. So it's not about, you know, your area, how you're doing a particular project, but how we all come together to deliver that mission.
And do you think technology is going to play a central role in kind of how these missions are delivered?
Absolutely, absolutely. Traditionally, I'm sure most of us have been in that situation where a policy is created and then handed over for delivery. And I think one of the key things and aspects about that multidiscipline team is having technology, digital and user research actually happening at policy creation, not after. So those tensions of we want the policy to do this, but actually our users want to interact like that is actually happening much earlier in that stage. So that full service design is really happening right at the beginning.
I'll probably come on to later for everybody some of the challenges around working in this different way. But Nick, I'm going to come to you. So you've worked closely with governments around the world on a range of kind of large projects. So one, how do you think the UK compares when it comes to agility and transformation in general? And looking to these missions, could we in the UK be learning from civil services in other countries about how to do this well?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much for the question. So firstly, Q5 is a consultancy that focuses on organisation change and transformation, and we think about the art and science of organisation health. And I think the first thing for any transformation is you need the data, you need the analytics, you need the finances, which is the science, but you equally need the art, which is purpose, behaviours, ways of working, culture. And I think the key thing for any large-scale transformation in government is the art, getting the magic right and the art right. I think from a mission perspective, there's probably three levels to it. What do we mean by mission? I started my career in the Air Force and participated in lots of missions in the Air Force. I think missions are a good thing. I think they should be achievable, they should be well risk mitigated, and they should be well resourced. And I think that's a key thing to bear in mind as the missions are developed, and you all work on the missions. I think from a UK perspective, there are things that have buffeted the UK in the last 5-6 years or so. Ukraine, amazing to see what's happening there. COVID, inflation and what's happened as a consequence of all that, but also things that we've done to ourselves unique to the UK, like Brexit, for example, and what happened under the last government. And I think that we potentially have lost a little bit of focus, and I think globally there are countries who are 10 years ahead of us now. Particularly we've seen Ukraine, but also in Africa, in the East, in the Middle East, there are countries doing things at a scale and ambition that is different to the UK's. And right now it feels like rightfully the UK is trying to fix the things that have been neglected maybe for a period. But I guess my challenge is the UK being ambitious enough? We're seeing other countries right now. Should the UK be being more ambitious, and is the UK still leading? And I think the final thing I'd say of missions, and from a people perspective, the very nature of the word mission, it brings pace, it brings focus, it brings energy, it brings drive. I think for people involved in those things, you need to celebrate progress, you need to embrace the achievements you make and learn the lessons by not achieving things when you don't achieve them as quickly as you want. And don't forget to take a break and a rest. And the military learns that really well by surging from missions and then recovering from those. And I think this is going to be the way of working for the future, because the scale of the challenge in the world right now is huge. Enjoy the ride.
Thanks so much. I mean, really good to hear so many of the things you're saying there. Possibly, it'd be interesting to hear what the audience think about maybe the UK has lost focus a little bit because of other things they were focusing on, and so are we now refocusing with the missions on kind of delivering services in that way? Are we being ambitious enough with these missions? But also, I love what you say about we should take time to pause a little bit, take a bit of a breather, and also celebrate some of those successes. I think that might feel quite difficult to do for a lot of people in the audience when there is so much to be done. So thanks so much. Lots of food for thought there. And Gillian, on that note then of kind of the UK and its place compared to other countries. Obviously, you have had the background in the UK, now work with the OECD, so you have this overview perspective. From the work you do in the OECD in particular, do you think, one, setting missions is a good thing? And do you think the UK is well placed to do this?
Thanks, Siobhan, and it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. Yes, having worked in the civil service for over 17 years before I moved out to the OECD, I would say that I know the reality. I know the reality of what cross-government coordination and collaboration looks like. So in my mind, what the UK is doing with its missions is actually incredibly brave and incredibly bold.
But not brave and bold in a Sir Humphrey.
No, no, exactly.
Actually brave and bold. Okay.
Good point.
Yeah.
And at the OECD, we work with countries on missions approaches. We have a missions actions lab where we work with countries to support them in the design and implementation of their missions, but also we learn from them in terms of what works and what doesn't work. And I would say that the scale of what the UK is doing in terms of a missions approach is far bigger than the majority of missions approaches that we're seeing in both our member countries and non-member countries. So I think that's something important to keep in mind when we think about the benefits and the challenges in particular. But I do think it is a good thing to be doing, in particular in the context of what it is that we're looking to achieve. And in the view of the OECD, one of the main things that governments need to be looking at in the current context is the trust that citizens have in their government, because that is what has been lost, and that is what is causing a number of the problems that we see in terms of being able to deliver on and see success in our policy agendas. And I just wanted to mention a few figures for the UK from the OECD survey on drivers of trust in public institutions, which is a survey that actually is done amongst the population and looks at where trust lies and what is driving those levels of trust. These figures are for 2023, so for under the previous government, but I think they probably still apply to a certain extent. So only 27% of UK citizens surveyed had high or moderately high trust in national government. Many of you here will be glad to hear that that number goes up to 45% for trust in the civil service. When it comes to trust in government's ability to deliver public services, now administrative services, so your passports, etc., the trust is incredibly high, actually. It's at 74%, which for most of the OECD is down around 60%. Health and education is much lower than that and has gone down significantly since we did the survey last in 2021. But where it's very interesting is that the UK is lower on all measures relating to complex decision-making than its OECD peers. This is something that we've really been focusing on at the OECD, is how on earth do you get that trust back to be able to deliver on some of these really big, complex policy challenges? And I think missions approaches could be one solution. And I think that could be a solution because in the current fiscally constrained context, it allows you to actually focus and prioritize some of the resources that you do have. It's an opportunity to clearly communicate with citizens, something that we don't necessarily do very well, particularly in a complex information environment, on what it is the government is trying to achieve and the progress it is making. And it's also, and very importantly, an opportunity to reform the civil service and the culture within the service, that civil service that does need to change.
Thanks, Jim. I mean, really interesting But obviously lots to explore there on the trust kind of score and why that might have gone down. But maybe it links to something that you were saying about, we've been through this period of kind of quite a lot of churn. So it might be something to do with that. But again, the audience might have questions on that and kind of the next stage for the government on rebuilding back that trust and the importance of the trust. So Talia, I'm going to come to you. Obviously, you sit in a department. So the mission for MOJ, how different is that from the one for Department for Energy? And are you seeing changes, the board up and running? What's happening in MOJ on the missions?
Yeah, sure. So the missions ethos is something that we are very, very happy with, actually. It's about collaboration, leadership, taking a more preventative approach, looking at longer-term outcomes, and it connects with how the Ministry of Justice think about how they need to deliver public services. So the articulation of missions and specific areas that the government's focusing on really authorise that way of thinking and going further with that. So obviously we're connected very closely with the Safer Streets mission, which includes as part of its outcomes a focus on rebuilding confidence in the criminal justice system, for example. So there's an implicit acknowledgement that trust is a key concern, a key potential outcome that can be delivered through these missions. In the Ministry of Justice, we have already a close connection between the way that we develop policy and the way that we deliver services. We're very operational in that respect. So it's really key that I think we take advantage of the missions lens to enable that and work in partnership across government. So we're really looking forward to working on the missions as they develop.
Yeah. Thanks, Talia. And I want to ask all of you on the back of this. So I wrote down here, let me see. I wrote down here, Nick, that you talked, it wasn't just about the processes, also I put heart, but I think you said the art of, and I think heart and art actually is about the people as much as the processes. And I just wonder, Talia, I'm going to ask you and then Alexis, in terms of, it came up yesterday, the missions is as much about changing culture as it is about changing those processes. And some of those barriers around working in silos are proving quite hard traditionally to break down. Do you think the missions are going to actually change the way departments work with each other and people at an individual level work with each other? Sorry.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the missions give us something to focus on that requires collaboration, and I can see a lot of thoughtfulness about the different tools that we need to apply. So, I heard a conversation yesterday about the way that we think about missions as a series of horizontal achievements, and the way that the civil service is set up is a series of vertical departments. But we've seen through recent times when something needs to be done, people come together in public services to be able to deliver that. So having kind of a point you're reaching to, that I think there are some potential challenges.
Oh,
Sorry.
we'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on the mic. There are some potential challenges maybe with things like the way that budgets are set for government departments, I think, the way that capability and expertise has been developed. Historically, you have people who have digital skills, for example, that aren't very well integrated in different departments. I think over the last few years, we've seen a definite change across government in how that works. In the MOJ, we have a whole group that does service transformation that is thinking carefully about the ways of working across the department. So, for example, we've set up a series of pathfinders that focus on particular services that we want to improve for victims, for example, linking data across the victim's journey, but also not just on the front line, in the department itself, so thinking carefully about how the functions that we run, how HR works, how policy is developed, using the right tools to make sure that, technology can support that and people can work together on the things they need to work together on.
And again, so technology is going to play a crucial part of this. And Alexis, do you see that the cultural issues changing? Do you think people are more open to working with each other across professions, as Talia was saying, but also across departments?
I think so. I've been in the civil service now nearly 18 years, and definitely the culture has changed to when it first started. And obviously a new generation of thinking is coming into the civil service as well. So the ideas of that traditional hierarchy has definitely started to be a bit more flexible about how we work together, how we have the same outcomes, how actually relationships are built rather than anything else. So absolutely agree with the panel that, hearts and mind and culture is the biggest barrier, and it has been, but we have a huge opportunity that we're building on things that have happened to this country, and the civil service has reacted to it, whether it's COVID, whether it's Brexit. We have come together, and so that sort of fostered community feel is actually still there, and that's what we're building on.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, over to the audience. So thanks very much for the panel. Yes, we've got a hand come up straight away down here. If you could put your hand up really high, that would be great. And then second question over here. So I don't know if we have a second microphone. If you could keep your hand up, we'll get a second microphone here. There are two next to each other, which is great, and then I'll come over there. Okay, so we've got 4 questions lined up. Over to you.
Hi there. So my question is for Alexis. So it's something that's been a really key part of the conversations that, we've all been having yesterday, and a very key part of today's keynotes is the opportunities of AI and the way that AI tools can be used to make public services more effective and to sort of do more within the financial constraints that the government is kind of handling at the moment. And something that was raised, I think, in the last session yesterday, is that while AI is something that does offer a great opportunity to make things more efficient, it is also something that might pose a bit of a challenge in terms of its energy costs. So I'd be really interested to know, in terms of moving forward towards trying to achieve the mission of net zero clean energy by 2030, how is that being factored into the work that's going into that?
Sure. So I can answer that. We have an AI board, for example, and those questions are being looked at. And it's not just AI. AI is a tool. So if you look forward to quantum computing, that's even going to require some more energy. So we're looking at how we can sustain that with clean energy. That's one of the key missions around that. So to use these tools, we don't want to rely on fossil fuels, but we want to enable people to use these tools. So how do we look at investing? And you probably would have seen in the last week that GBE has launched some investments for schools and hospitals to use solar panels, and that's to help them power their own IT as well as run their building. So we're looking at all of these opportunities to work out, actually it's a balancing act, right? You can't say don't use the tool because people will use it, but at the same time you have to look at the clean energy used much more to power these tools than just rely on fossil fuels. So it's a great question, and it's something that we don't ignore because of the department we're in, but it's definitely something that's a factor for us. So we are looking at different types of investment as well. So how do we make them more efficient? So absolutely is front of mind. It's one of those things that support that mission. So we don't want to just use it and just create a problem for us.
Thanks.
Sounds like an interesting puzzle.
Thanks for the question. We've got 2 questions over here, and then the microphone can go to the lady in the front here for the 4th questions on the front row. Yes.
Hi, good morning. My name's Laura. I'm working in the Home Office as part of the EU settlement scheme, and I'm quite new to this profession. I come from the education sector, working in the classroom for 10 years. So, what advice would you give to someone that's sort of like on the ground, working the cases, dealing with the customers, on how to sort of break through if you've got ideas, or you want to sort of make some changes, but you're sort of coming across policies, red tape and things like that, so you don't really know where to begin?
So I really like this question. If you didn't quite hear the question, so the question is, if you're kind of on the front line and you're dealing with customers How do you get your ideas, if you've got ideas for how you can improve the service, how you can improve things we do, how do you get those ideas listened to and fed into the system? This is right at the heart, I think, of creating a culture of innovation. How do we make sure that everybody can feed into this culture of innovation? Nick, any thoughts from Q5? What would you say to your staff, but also what advice would you give to a civil servant?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a brilliant question. And obviously, no change happens unless it impacts you on the front line. So you're absolutely critical to any mission because you're interfacing with citizens in cases right on the front line. There's all sorts of things, but at the heart of the culture, the organisation needs to be a learning organisation, an agile organisation. So firstly, it should be quite flat if you're going to be doing things at pace. So information and issues that you encounter that you want to share and you see improvements, there should be a mechanism in the organisation to allow you to share those things. People talk about change champions and a network of innovation champions who can collect those sorts of things. There should be regular forums, either through agile sprints and the ways in which you're working and developing new services where you can bring your ideas. And equally, there should be a culture of sharing and a culture of communicating and a leadership culture that allows you access to the leadership for you to share what you're encountering and what you think could be done better.
Right. Gillian, you're, I guess, pulling on your experience from government, do you think we could be better at this kind of thing, at enabling ideas?
Absolutely. I mean, this is something that, and we actually do work at the OECD on what we call human-centered public services. And one of the main, we actually have an international standard on this that is aspirational standard because the majority of OECD member countries don't actually meet it yet. But one of the key aspects of that is making sure that we're not only listening to the citizens, which is obvious, although actually the majority of countries don't do that very well in terms of feedback on public services, but also making sure that we're listening to the people that are working on the ground delivering those services. And when it links in with the missions, what I would say is one of the key challenges that the government will face here is actually being able to make sure that there is buy-in for the missions at all levels of government, okay? This is an absolutely critical piece of it. And making sure that your voices are heard and that people at local government level voices are heard and that they actually feel that they're part of the missions is key. So that means regular communication on the missions to staff on the ground and regular feedback the other way.
Thanks. Talia, Alexis, did you want, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose this is where mission delivery and, an innovative mindset come together. There were quite a few conversations yesterday about how innovation's been a real focus for the civil service over the last year. Cabinet Office chose innovation as their one big thing, and the MOJ actually came top of the Whitehall leaderboard for engagement and the number of people completing the masterclass, which provided the tools and the framework to think about how, if you want to do things better, you can think about what problem you're solving, how you bring in others to do that, how you test that, how you scale that. And so there are tools available for learning around innovation that give you that kind of way of thinking. And I think others are right. It's also about how your colleagues buy into things, how that conversation is enabled by the people in charge of your teams. So, I'd encourage you not to be shy about speaking if you have any ideas about how to improve it, because people should be listening to you.
I'd probably add I was you when I started, and building those relationships and getting your message across, and actually sometimes being willing to say it's someone else's idea to get the outcome that you're looking for is really, really important. So keep doing what you're doing.
And just to say, we do run, there's an annual event called the Data Challenge. So if you've got ideas that involve data, you can submit your ideas through to the Data Challenge. It's on the Global Government Forum website, and they get kind of judged by senior civil servants, and the best ideas get taken forward. We did in the past used to run a kind of Dragon's Den style, it was called the Lion's Lair, I think, where you could pitch ideas as well, and we had Peter Jones involved. Maybe we should resuscitate that kind of idea as well. So, great. We had another question right next to you, I think.
Hi, my name's Wayne, and I'm also with the Home Office. And I found that there's lots of great ideas, but a lot of the answers tend to be, we need to speak to policy, and policy take months because they're so busy and understaffed and everything. So because my question was originally quite similar. I've had to sort of restructure it to, I can't change anything unless my leaders are all on board. So how do you get your leadership and their leadership to help cut through all the red tape and bureaucracy to actually get the government to be rewired into doing the things that matter? I can't help but be amazed by what Ukraine's achieved and think that I don't even see that in the next decade for us because of how far behind we are.
Yeah.
And it's because of red tape and policy saying no, because we're too afraid to actually make mistakes. So we never make mistakes and learn from them like other governments.
And just to say, when you say policy, which profession are you sitting in?
So I'm in the Home Office at the moment as a caseworker.
And are you in a digital role?
No.
Are you in a policy?
Oh no, I'm just.
Are you a secret spy? Is that why you can't tell us?
Sorry, no, I'm just a caseworker.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're in the same kind of area. Okay.
Sorry.
So again, a very similar. Does anyone want to touch on how do you get kind of the professions, I think, to be talking to each other at the most senior levels?
I've got experience of working in a very different country with a very different system. It's Saudi Arabia, but underneath the system and what's happening inside their civil service, you need. I mean, it's touched on a point you said earlier about getting the citizens involved. They've done a great job there of getting the whole country inspired by what they're trying to do at change, and you need to find a way of connecting the top-down bureaucratic policy bit you've described with the bottom-up innovation. And so what drives the top-down in that country is real definition of the KPIs under the vision drivers. So we have 6 missions here. The KPIs are quite abstract for most people in this room. What you need to do, the departments need to do is work on what that means for each department. And when that's clear, what the Home Office is doing versus what MOJ is doing or what DESNZ is doing, that enables that collaboration, builds that confidence and trust at the leadership level to allow things to cascade down because people are clear about the KPIs they're trying to hit and the numbers they're trying to hit.
And I think also the missions will probably bridge that gap a little bit between policy and delivery, policy and operational delivery. So that should help with some of the issues that you're seeing at the moment. We have another question over here.
Good morning. Is this working?
Yes.
We've learned so much yesterday and this morning about the incredible achievements of other countries, and it's been truly inspirational and enlightening. What can the UK government do to shout louder and more proudly about our achievements in innovation and digital transformation? Things like the One Login or Government Wallet. And what can we do to learn from those other countries who've really brought the public along the journey with them? How can we do that better in the UK now and in the years to come?
Thanks. Really lovely question. So how can we celebrate more loudly the successes in the UK? Gillian, yeah.
I love that question because it's something that I've actually felt really hard moving into the international sphere from the domestic sphere. In that, certainly my experience when I was working on the international side in the UK government, just to be clear, I was in the Treasury. The UK was really loud and proud about leading on the international stage, and that we were ahead of many countries in many areas, including in terms of the way that we govern. I don't see that anymore working at the OECD. The UK is there. The UK is proud on some fronts, don't get me wrong, but not to the same extent. And that needs to change because the UK, I mean, you saw in the Ukraine presentation where we are, we're not far behind some of the real leaders in terms of digital public service. So why aren't we shouting about that? And I know that, obviously, as you said, the country has been buffeted a lot in recent years, but I think there is some leadership required to make sure that, although I know it costs to be on the international stage, that we are doing some of that and we are going out there and saying the UK is here and we're doing well, because I actually think that will also help to bring the rest of the civil service along, but also bring the population along as well.
Anyone else want to come in on that issue? Yes, Tali.
I suppose, thinking about the timing, we've just had didn't happen very long ago, we had a change of government, and there feels like there's a kind of regrouping around priorities and how those are communicated, and recent announcements and the statement today. Sometimes things come thick and fast, and you don't expect them. I see active connections and communications around particular areas of policy in particular departments. I think, Alexa's department, it's a necessary conversation that you're having with international partners about, how they're taking things forward. Same with Ministry of Justice. The rule of law is a big consideration globally at the moment, and we want to be part of that conversation. But maybe there can be, around digital especially, a regrouping of how we communicate things that we really can do in the UK.
Thanks. And I mean, yesterday, if you were here, we had the head of the Nigerian public sector here saying that they've learnt a lot from the UK. And I think quietly, I know the UK welcomes a lot of delegations and, does share the great work that it's done. But I think you're right that voice on the kind of global stage maybe has become a bit quieter, and maybe that's something to take away and think about. Absolutely. We have another question at the back of the hall. Thanks.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm Palvinder Kaur. I mean, the discussion so far has been very exciting, but I feel what I haven't heard is the opportunity for other organisations to kind of accelerate the delivery. So what I mean by this is, what's the role of third sector, local government, private sector? So I'd just love to hear what you think about that.
Thanks. That's a really good question. I'm just saying, do stick around for the whole day, because we do have Theo from the London Assembly who will be on the final panel talking about work they've been doing between London and central government. But Alexis, going to bring you in. Third sector and kind of local government.
It's massive for us. So devolution plays a massive role about how we support. The delivery will ultimately happen at local level for most of our policies. So we understand that that's a huge part. So from our perspective is, how do we enable that to happen? What services and tools do we enable it to make it easier for not just local authorities, but also the third sector, so there's no cost associated with delivering those schemes. So it's absolutely a key component for us, and if I haven't said it, I apologise, but happy to pick up the discussion offline as well.
Anyone else want to come in, the joining up across sectors? Yep.
So, I mean, at the OECD, we have kind of 5 principles for success for missions, and one of them is completely dedicated to this, which is, you not only need to have coordination and alignment across governments, but you need it between levels of government, and you need it with wider stakeholders, and that includes civil society as well. So when you have any of the structures that you put in place beyond the boards, to make sure that the missions happen, need to bring those key stakeholders on board. I have to admit, I don't know well enough whether that's happening in the UK missions or not, but it is one of the key factors of success.
Thanks. So I've definitely got 2 more questions. We've got a hand up there, and then there was a lady here. If we've got time, I know there's a third question, but we'll take these 2 first. Yeah.
Hello, so I'm Richard Hudson. I've worked in DEFRA Environment Department for 3 years, and prior to that 20 plus years in the higher education sector, where I worked on policy very creatively and effectively for over 20 years. My question is there's that risk of culture eating strategy for breakfast and being process-led, and what do you say to civil servants who perhaps feel very straitjacketed by the processy approaches in the civil service to be more creative?
Okay, so are we losing creativity? Are we too driven by process? Alexis, you're nodding there.
I think, I think that there's been many initiatives over the years about how do we make the civil service work in different ways, how do we work more collaborative, how do we work in multidiscipline teams. And probably the one area that the DDAP function has succeeded the most is being able to bring that all together. I think part of it is the safety blanket of process sometimes gets in the way, rather than necessarily the idea of pushing against the process. I think we had a conversation there about risk, being risk averse. I don't want to change the process because I don't want to be the one. But I think what missions does is identify those processes that do need to change, because, let's be frank, some processes do need to change to enable our missions to be successful. And that's one of the key things of the structure of the mission, is to support that, find where the processes do need changing and updating, and then or removed in some instances in order for us to be able to deliver our missions. Not just that mission, but enable us to be agile and flexible in the future as well.
Nick, do you find the public sector is very process? I mean, you've worked in both, public and private, so.
Yeah, yes, I do. I think times of great crisis have shown governments to be at their best. And the word mission gives permission to operate slightly differently, I think. During the pandemic, there were some bad decisions made, clearly, but equally, some of the best things that government can do happened in the pandemic because trust was granted and people who hold accountability trusted the people below them to make decisions about things that ordinarily they would hold themselves because of the severity of what was going on. So you can do it. The system can do it when it needs to do it. And I think the key thing around the missions and the term mission is broad system permission to operate in a different way and break down those bureaucracies and break down those barriers.
Thanks. We do have a question here, and if time, we'll come to another question over there. But yeah.
Hi, my name's Harriet. I'm part of the Ministry of Justice. I specifically work as part of the Offender Subject Access Request team. So a lot of the things we deliver is highly operational. We have grown massively in the last few years. We've had to expand because the changes to the Data Protection Act has meant that we've essentially multiplied our team by 10 over the last few years. Our biggest problem that we have right now is that we are very focused on our mission, we're focused on making that delivery, but our area is really heavily tied to work with HMPPS.
Right.
So what would you say is the best advice you could give for people who are working with a sector that is particularly stretched in terms of manpower? That's sort of our really biggest blocker that we tend to find, is that we're making a lot of this progress, we're doing the right things that we need to get on our mission, but because our partners are very restricted with the actions that they can take and the moves that we can make, it tends to leave us with a blocker in terms of progress.
Thanks. So this is going to get to the heart of the missions, I think, is that there is going to be so many different bodies involved in the delivery of a single mission. How does one part of that mission help another part of the mission if they are struggling with limited resources or any other issues that are blocking them? It's an MOJ kind of based area, Talia. What would you say?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it touches back on the previous question, actually. Process can be seen as a blocker, but it can also enable some guardrails if you have really clear governance for decision making. And I think prioritization is a key component of missions. We shouldn't be asking everybody to do everything all the time. And that's including because there's really stretched resources, constrained capacity in our frontline service delivery. So I would hope that missions would enable some clear thinking about, what actually are the priorities. And I have seen that in the way that they've been set out so far. And then that connects also, I suppose, with the kind of the culture of doing things differently. So thinking about whether, given resource constraints, there's tools that can be applied to do things slightly differently, and even not do things at all, and look at the risks of that. So it's about the level of risk tolerance we have for that as well.
I mean, it will raise all sorts of issues, I guess, around how you manage performance when you're in a mission. If it's not you that can't do something, if it's some other part of the mission, then who's going to be performance managed on that particular element? So I think that's quite an interesting conversation. We probably do have time for this one final question. So if you put your hand up, sorry, Anne, I'm going to make you run around again today. Thanks.
Is it working? Perfect. Hi everyone, my name is Julie. I'm a policy officer from the Department of Health. And I just wanted to ask about, because I was born and raised in Abu Dhabi. I lived my whole life in the Middle East, and I finally made it here in the UK. So I wanted to ask, because Nick mentioned that the UK is behind 10 years, but growing up in Abu Dhabi, I always noticed that industry leaders and experts, they're all from the UK. So there's a lot of talent and ambition here coming from the UK. So I was wondering, what barriers do you think are here in the UK, and how can we break those to make sure that we are delivering those missions?
So it's a great question to end on, because really it gets I mean, one way you could phrase that is, why are talented people moving out of the UK? Why are they not in the UK public sector? That might be another way of thinking about that. Gillian, you're nodding on this one.
Well, it's a big question, and I have to say we work a lot with the UAE. And what the UAE is doing in terms of government reform, and particularly on the digital and innovation agenda, is incredible. And I think one of the key differences there is access to resources. I think that is one of the main challenges, that is the really difficult economic environment that we're working in. And having very little resource to draw upon means that, yes, the missions can allow us to prioritize, but even within that, I'm absolutely sure there still isn't enough. So that's one challenge, and that's a question around growth, etc. In terms of UK government as well, I think, listen, you know, the UK government advanced way faster than many other governments in the past. And now we're quite big, and we're quite, I mean, reasonably burdensome. And I'm not saying that, I mean, I think that's totally normal, and that's what many other countries similar to the UK are like. But it does mean that we have to really now put a strong emphasis on breaking down some of those barriers, some of those processes that get in the way of us being agile. And we really do, you know, speaking of the previous presentation, need to look at the opportunities provided by digital tools, including AI, for the public sector, because there are real gains to be made there. And I know that that's something that the government has announced its intention to do.
Thanks. Alexis, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm going to bring in a question we had earlier on, which is, you know, digital identities is key to making things happen. We've talked about digital identities over here, and actually we haven't been talking to our citizens and policy and everyone else how important that is. Great work done, but actually we could do more there by pushing that out. And that has been the great advantage of other sort of digitalized nations, is that ability to identify the citizen. So for us to know that we have a tool there, but we're not probably pushing it as much to enable us to have that shared service, is probably practically one of our biggest challenges.
Any final words from Nick or Talia on this?
I was just going to say that the 10 years ahead of thinking, and the drivers are economic and societal. I'd say finishing on a positive for the UK. There's huge progress being made in that part of the world, but they're doing everything all at the same time. And so that brings its own consequences, which is thousands and thousands and thousands of decisions have been made real time with not really a great appreciation for what the consequences are going to be in 10 or 15 years' time. And in this country, we still have amazing institutions. We have amazing ways of assuring what we do and how we create policy and do what we do, which allows us to do things at a slightly different pace and hopefully make better decisions. And at the start of missions, one of the key things is the quality of decisions you make and the consequences of those further down the line, particularly in your area, Alexis, and AI and so on. So we do have amazing things in place here to allow us to deliver better than other parts of the world. And that's why they learn from us still in that part of the world. They want our institutional knowledge.
Talia, any final thoughts?
Well, just being clear and real about the kind of skills and capabilities that are required if we're working in the public sector and the civil service in the UK. And I think there's going to be a rapid shift in the recognition of that. I mean, there already has been, but the integration, coming back to kind of the multidisciplinary effort, but not only the technical skills, but the acknowledgement of people developing policy that that's the kind of approach that we need to take, and a big shift there would help us, I think.
And I think in the announcements, didn't the Prime Minister say that there could be a distinction in kind of pay levels to bring in tech talent? So that might help address some of those issues. Well, please join me in saying a big thank you and a warm round of applause to our panel. I think we've raised a lot of issues that will be followed up in sessions now throughout the day. And on that note, you've got 20 minutes now. So if you come back to your sessions at 10 to 11, that would be great. In here, we will be continuing to talk about AI and productivity. On the Accelerate stage, it's all about evidence in policymaking. And on the Transform stage, we'll be talking about innovation in risk management. So enjoy your coffee break, and we'll see you back at 10 to 11. Thanks so much.